Hello, everybody. As they're beginning to trickle in, I just want to welcome you to part 2 of our PBM series hosted by Greg Baker of AffirmedRx. As I've mentioned times before, we're building a network here of people that we trust in this healthcare world. I think that's an incredibly important thing to have. And Greg, if you remember the movie Meet the Parents, right? He's in our circle of trust. He's somebody who we really value here. So without further ado, I'll introduce Greg Baker. Take it away. He seems to have gone off camera, so we got to wait for him to come back here. There he is. You good?
Hey, Mike, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I thought I was doing so good not having problems. Then my computer just completely blanked on me. So sorry about that.
You're all set and you're ready to go whenever you're ready.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Now I'm just trying to figure out where that Zoom meeting went. So hopefully I can see slides. There we are. Okay, thank you all. Thanks for the intro. Hey, all. It's Greg Baker, pharmacist by training. Just quick background if anybody wasn't on the first one. I've spent about 30 years in pharmacy so far. A lot of that was on the community side, but really the last 10, 12 years spent working directly with self-funded employers, the likes of like Microsoft, BMW, Disney. And so really got this interesting inside perspective from the benefit leader standpoint on what was happening with their PBM contract benefits, relationships, and continue to see some very interesting things coming out of it. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about here today is just self-taught. I'm maybe fortunately or unfortunately, there's no book you can read that says, hey, here's all the great and wonderful things that come out of working with a PBM that you should be aware of. But as you continue to learn more and more about this PBM industry, we've really tried to compile a lot of it and then have conversations like this in as simple a fashion as possible to really make sure that we're, sharing our knowledge and experience with others who are making purchasing decisions on behalf of their organizations, and then of course the employees and dependents thereof. Annie, thank you for putting in the chat. If you guys do have any questions, yeah, please definitely send in a chat or a Q&A, and we'll talk about those as we go. Feel free to do them in real time, and we'll try to catch them in real time too. I'll try to watch out for those. Probably makes it a little bit better. So for an hour, everybody doesn't just simply listen to me droning on and on about the slides that we've got here today. So Katie and our team is running the slides. So Katie, thank you for that. And as we go into the presentation today, really have three specific topics we want to talk about. One is around contract language. Two is really some of the games, as we call it, that PBMs play in order to drive profit for themselves. I think it's really important. The more you understand where a PBM's making money, then you can really then understand from your standpoint what you're actually paying for, and then that money you're paying is going into their profit. That's probably not always the best thing for you and your organization. So let's be thoughtful about how then we interact with PBMs in those areas. And then I think you guys all know, right? If you decide, hey, my PBM contract's coming up, I probably want to see if this is the right PBM for me. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but let's do an RFP just to make sure. So we bring in a consultant, we do an RFP. Typically in that RFP process, the consultant then shares their spreadsheet with you and says, hey, here's the discounts and rebates for these PBMs, and now which one do we want to choose? And it's not always as simple as numbers on paper. So we'll really talk through some of the things that matter from a spreadsheet standpoint, but also, of course, some things that don't matter from a spreadsheet standpoint. So with that said, just to level set from a high level before we jump into some of the more tactical pieces. One, I think it's always important to think about the big chunks of people who really touch what is the PBM industry today in the pharmacy supply chain industry. Because almost everybody makes a percentage of their profit is revenue or versus their revenue. So we always say, if a manufacturer, wholesaler, PBM can either ship, dispense, make, or approve a $5,000 drug versus a $50 drug, knowing that they are going to have about a 10% profit margin on that. They're sitting there saying, well, do I want to make 10% on $5,000 or do I want to make 10% off $50? Well, 10% off $5,000, if you're a for-profit company, sounds significantly better than the alternative. So that's one of the big reasons, in our opinion, why healthcare costs continue to go up, because there's just this complete misalignment in the fact that the manufacturer, the wholesaler, and the PBM really like to drive costs higher because it leads to higher profits for them. But then when we talk to self-funded employers, that's really bad, because at the end of the day, you want to lower your drug costs. You want to make sure that the costs that your members are paying at the pharmacy counter from an out-of-pocket perspective are as low as they can. And really then make sure that we're doing the right thing when it comes to that cost versus quality. So just again, as we think about it, make sure it's important to understand what everybody's true motivation is and what we're really then trying to achieve out of that. So then on the next slide, as we think about all of this kind of healthcare complexity as well, over the last 5 years, we've heard a lot about this concept of vertical and horizontal integration. A lot of people keep saying, well, hey, like, I'll just pick on Cigna there, like, because Cigna's the insurer, because they own a PBM, because their PBM owns a GPO now that does rebate contracting, and they own specialty pharmacy, and then they own doctors and Village Health and Teladoc and all of these other things. That it's all in this one vertical. It's going to be really great because it's going to coordinate care. We're going to be able to share data, and it's going to drive down costs. And our contention is kind of the opposite, right? So we're 5 years in on pretty much all of this vertical and horizontal integration. And in the last 5 years, we see costs continue to spiral up, and we see quality continue to go down. So if we just really look at the results that these groups have provided us as the American public, they are not good. So we really are trying to, again, take a step back and say, each of these verticals is a for-profit company. The United Healthcare vertical, they just announced earnings, I think it was 2 days ago. Their earnings were up 12%. They were really excited about how much they were making in profit. They said within 3 years, they should be between a $550 and $600 billion company by revenue. I mean, it's massive. And then that's, $30 to $45 billion in EBITDA. And again, as they continue to tell Wall Street how great it is that they're increasing their revenue faster than expected and increasing their profits faster than expected, again, that money is all coming out of somewhere, and it's typically coming out of us. So they don't ever sit in on these calls and talk about how costs went down, their revenue went down because they dispensed a lot cheaper drugs, and they were able to provide all these better outcomes for American corporations and families. It's usually the exact opposite. So again, it's really important to look at this, in our opinion, in the context. It's very complex. You've got all these integrated organizations, and really they're just looking for ways to bring profits back to their shareholders versus really drive down costs and quality. So when it comes very specifically to the pharmacy space, again, it's not quite as convoluted as overall healthcare, but it's sure not a whole lot better. This is just a quick thing that we've thrown together that says, hey, if you think about the flow of funds, flow of drugs, and then flow of services through the system, just for one person in your organization to get their prescription filled, I mean, a lot of people are touching money as it goes through the system, or drugs. And really, pretty much, again, every one of those boxes outside of the one in the bottom left that says your organization likes costs going up. Well, of course, except your employees too. So we'll just call it the bottom row, your employees in your organization. Everybody above that really wants to make sure that costs go up because that increases their quality, or sorry, their profit. But again, you guys are kind of at the terminal end of the decisions that everybody above you make. And that is also important to try to figure out how you get somebody who can help make a better decision that is aligned with the interest of your organization and your employees. So thank you, Katie. When we really dig into kind of this concept of profitability and rebates and why it matters, again, it's important to, I think, in my opinion, look over time. And if we just break this down and say, is a percentage of profit for really the big PBMs, so CVS, Optum, Express Scripts, how were they making money? How are they making money today? And then again, how does that really impact the way we should be thinking about this industry? So if you look back in 2012 on the far left, rebates and price protection were almost half of the PBM's profit. And that was really about the time where people started saying, like, well, wait a second, PBM. So if you're making all of this money in what you define as rebates, I mean, you shouldn't be. I should get part of that. So, and then also back at that point, you can see kind of in the little gray bar where it says fees and GPOs above the 46%, it was only 5% was in fees. Well, now as we sit here, estimated for what will be 2023 profit levels, almost a quarter, 22% of the PBM's profit is coming out of those fees and GPOs, and only 13% is coming out of rebates. And the way that they've played that out is really just, it's a contractual game. In 2022, if the PBM was taking $1,000 in totality from the manufacturer, what they were saying then is, well, we don't have a bunch of, we've got like an admin fee, we've got like a market access fee maybe, and then we've got a formulary placement fee. So out of this $1,000, you're going to give me $100 for these three fees. And then I'm going to take a $90, again, contractually defined rebate. So then again, out of that money, and I'm sorry, I said $1,000, $900 of that then is considered rebate dollars. So then out of that $900 in rebates, they would give, call it $750 to their client, and then they would keep $150 of it. So then they had their $150 that they kept for, what was left over for the rebate, and then they got their $100 in their fees. And the market really started saying, hey, this is bad, PBM. You should be keeping rebate dollars. Those are meant for the client and to drive down costs for the client's employees and dependents. We don't want you doing that anymore. So PBMs have kind of figured that out. So they're like, okay, well, this is super easy. Fast forward to 2023. If they were taking that same $1,000 from the manufacturer, just in the contract, now we've seen up to 23 different fees. So now they've got all of these different fees they're charging for that equate to, call it $400. So now that's $400 they can keep. And then the $600 that's left over is defined as a quote unquote rebate. So when they pass you 100% of rebate dollars, everybody feels good because like, oh, good, PBM didn't keep any of the rebates. No, but they did keep a significant portion of the manufacturer revenue through these fees and other GPO contract language issues. So, that's a lot of money, again, that we still think should go to the employer. So, when you see a 100% rebate from your PBM and they act like they're doing a good job for you, that's not great. That's actually not good for you, frankly. But almost the bigger concern is that top box you can see around specialty and frankly mail order pharmacy. Mail's dropped a little bit because people just don't like mail, and that continues to be part of the national narrative is that you have to offer choice for where people get their prescriptions. So, mail is one thing, but then specialty, they can still force people to specialty. And that's almost 40% of their profits now. And again, as we'll kind of talk through with some of the other examples, PBMs do a lot of things in how they define contract language, what's a brand, what's a generic or other, through these specialty contracts to then, again, create a lot of different pools of profit for themselves. But, what I think the other quick important takeaway from this is, I think there's been this conception through, call it the last 10 years, that PBMs and consultants come to you and say, hey, yeah, here, if you go to Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, or one of these other places, it's more expensive. But if you send all your prescriptions to my pharmacy that I PBM and my specialty pharmacy that I PBM own, we'll always get you the best deal. And I think we're really seeing that is more and more not the case, because that deal you get from the PBM's mail and specialty pharmacy, where they get to decide what they pay themselves and they get to decide how much profit they make out of that, is almost always a higher number than if you would go to the community, because then they're paying the community a lot less than they're paying themselves. And then that's part of the reason they can meet some of these contractual pricing guarantees. But again, it's just how they're paying who and moving money around. But it usually equates to, again, at the end of the day, if they get to decide what they pay themselves, it's a really big number. And you can see how big a profit generator that is to them. So definitely, again, something to think about as you work with your PBMs and consultants in the future. And then from a rebate standpoint, again, we live in this world of vertical and horizontal integration, and they keep saying, hey, we're going to add all these layers in the middle, and it's going to drive more value because I've got this great purchasing power. Well, I don't know if you guys have heard of this concept of a GPO, but it really started in 2019 on the right side with Express Scripts. And so the real reality of what happened here is Express Scripts, again, if you kind of think back to 2016, 2017, 2018, you guys probably as employers started to ask more and more questions to say like, well, I'm supposed to get 100% of rebates. I want to see the manufacturer contract between the manufacturer and the PBM to make sure I'm getting all the money I'm due. And back then there was a lot of contracts that allowed you the ability to do that. In addition, state and federal policymakers were starting to dig into this whole rebate issue to say, hey, these PBMs seem to be keeping a lot of money in rebates. We're going to pass laws that say PBMs have to be more transparent and might even have to do reporting on the contractual relationship between the PBM and the pharmaceutical manufacturer. ESI is kind of sitting there going, well, this isn't good. We don't like any of this. We also are trying to figure out ways to create more and more money. So in their evil genius, they said, okay, I got this figured out. This is going to be great. So they called all the manufacturers into their corporate office and they said, hey guys, we're canceling all your contracts. So at this point in time, no pharmaceutical manufacturer has a contract with Express Scripts. You guys have 6 months to recontract with this new entity that we set up called Ascent. We domiciled it in Switzerland. And if you don't contract with Ascent in 6 months, you just won't be on formulary. And so that did two really important things for Express Scripts. One, it gave them the ability to now say, hey, I Express Scripts in a legal entity. Well, Ascent is a separate legal entity. And now Express Scripts, the PBM legal entity, guess what? It has no pharmaceutical manufacturer contracts. So anytime somebody would go to Express Scripts and say, hey, I'm having my contract, that I should be able to see all the contracts you have with the manufacturers, or state and federal policymakers say, hey, you're supposed to disclose all this information. Express Scripts is like, well, sorry, I don't have any. And gosh, when there's a firewall between me and this company in Switzerland that does all our rebate dollars. Well, then two is they have to make more profit year over year over year over year. It was great because they said, hey, we're going to start charging a 4% GPO fee. Now we're going to charge data access fees. The next year, we're going to charge more fees. So now they're charging all of these fees at this Ascent level. So Ascent's taking all this money out of it, and the money stays at the legal entity of Ascent. Then when Ascent passes to Express Scripts says, hey, we pass all of this manufacturer revenue to you. We're not keeping any. Well, you're right. Express Scripts, technically, the legal entity is not keeping it. But Ascent is part of the overall parent organization that is now known as Cigna, right? Because Cigna owns all of these things. And then they just bury the profit somewhere else. So the gamesmanship that occurs here is frankly scary in our opinion. But, when they started that, CVS saw it and they're like, oh, man, those guys are good. That's so good. We're going to start our own. So then they started Zinc as their GPO there on the left side at the top. Optum was a little slower to the game, but they sure picked it up quickly. So then they started MSR. So kind of my favorite thing about these is you've got Ascent, you've got Zinc, which is at least domiciled in the United States. And then you've got MSR, which is domiciled in Ireland. These just three companies will do over $200 billion this year, probably closer to $250 billion in rebates. So you've got three companies that are $250 billion in size, and you can barely find anything about them. MSR, we can't even find that exists. We know multiple media outlets have been trying to find MSR. Like if you Google this, you can't find it. If you go on LinkedIn, you can't find anybody who works for MSR. I don't think Zinc has any current employees. One guy who retired from CVS did put Zinc on his profile, but that's it. But again, how do you have these massive companies? They're supposed to be doing all this work, driving all this value, and yet nobody works there. Well, because they're shell organizations, and the people at Express Scripts, CVS, and Optum that was doing the rebate contracting with pharma before, they're still doing it. It's just when they sign a contract, the contract no longer says Express Scripts, CVS, or Optum. Now they just changed the name to Ascent, Zinc, or MSR. And all of a sudden, you've got this great shell game that you just created. And it creates profit and a lot of opacity. And it's wonderful if you're a PBM, but it's really, really bad if you're everybody else. So, these adding of layers is not great. And then even more layers, because the more big and complex you can get, again, the more profit you can hide. And I think hopefully you guys have all seen where about 3 weeks ago, Express Scripts made this announcement that they're like, hey, you're right. Everybody's talking about what Mark Cuban's doing, and he's buying drugs at this acquisition price and marking it up and then selling them out the door, and he's saving all this money. And we're going to do the same thing, right? And they got some good press, and they acted like they were going to save all this money for Americans. Well, one, they're not publishing their acquisition cost. So ESI, you and your purchasing power is thousands of times bigger than Mark Cuban's. He's putting all of his prices out there. He's putting his invoice out there, so you can see exactly what he's paying for drugs. They're not willing to do that. Well, the interesting thing is 2 years ago, Express Scripts started this company. And again, you can see circled there in the bottom. It's a little small, but wholly owned subsidiary of the Cigna Corporation called Quallent. So what they were doing is they used to go to the wholesaler directly. They would then have their mail order pharmacy, again, think all these separate legal entities. So mail order would buy drugs from wholesaler. There's an invoice there and there's an acquisition cost. So they saw a lot of this acquisition cost stuff coming. So Express Scripts, again, and its evil genius said, this is going to be great. We're going to start this company called Quallent Pharmaceuticals. You can see there in the box. If you go look up the address for Quallent Pharmaceuticals, it's in the Cayman Islands, because every good business starts in the Cayman Islands. And I'm sure there is a massive pool of people who really understand the U.S. pharmacy market from a purchasing standpoint that they're hiring down there. All of that is obviously deep sarcasm. But, they've started this company, again, this paper-based organization called Quallent, overseas, frankly, in a tax shelter place. And so then what that does is when they say, fine, we're going to sell our drugs at acquisition costs like Cuban does, they fully control the acquisition cost, because now instead of having a contract directly between their mail order and the manufacturer, or the wholesaler, the wholesaler then signs a contract with Quallent. Then they pay off that invoice. Well, then Quallent can create any invoice they want and charge Express Scripts mail order anything they want for these drugs. So where, if they had the direct relationship with the wholesaler to the mail order and they were spending $5, well, if I'm doing a 15% markup off $5 and I'm saying I'm doing things at acquisition costs, I can only make so much money. But if I create Quallent and I put it in the Cayman Islands, then they can buy the drug for $5. Then they can turn around and sell that same drug to the mail order pharmacy for $50. And when I mark that up 15%, for my parent organization of Cigna, that sure feels a whole lot better. So, again, they've started these companies. I'm sure many of you have never heard of Quallent, MSR, Zinc, and there's a reason for it, right? So these are just shell organizations. We can't find anybody who works at any of these things. We can't really see the value that they're driving for American corporations and families, but it's pretty scary overall if you really think about what they're doing. Then as this all relates to your contract language, right? And we had an interesting opportunity about 3 weeks ago. We were in Washington, D.C. We were working with the Senate Help Committee, which Bernie Sanders is the chair. And there's this guy, Zane, who is in charge of doing all of the PBM reform bills coming out of Help. And they've got a pretty good bill in place. But then in their bill, they say, hey, a brand drug, a generic drug, a specialty drug, and a limited distribution drug, LDD drug, is like this happens to it. And we were like, well, Zane, tell me what a brand drug is. Tell me what a generic drug is. And he's like, well, a brand is a brand. I'm like, whoa, but nobody in the industry really agrees on what a brand drug is. And you can manipulate language to say whatever you want. My favorite, like at the bottom, that 3.20 is, it says generic drug. And we pulled these directly out of contracts that are not good contracts. So these are not in a contract I would ever touch myself, but through publicly available data, you can get other companies' contracts, mostly state and municipalities. But for this one, it says a generic drug is a drug that is identical to a brand name drug in dosage, strength, safety, and has taken quality, performance, and intended use. I mean, it sounds good, but like it's just wide open. And so there's some brand drugs that are the same as other brand drugs. So is that a generic? How does that work? And then even the one above it, a brand name drug. It's a trade name that only be produced and sold by a pharmaceutical company holding a patent that has been licensed and authorized by that patent holder to produce and sell the drug. I mean, that's literally every generic drug too. Every generic drug has a trade name. It's only produced and sold by the company that holds the patent to, because you need a patent to do a generic drug. So by that definition, while it sounds like it's kind of this really technical thing, and well, that sounds good for a brand drug. Well, they can put anything they want in that brand drug bucket. It's not easy to say 3 times fast. And then, they can manipulate these games and, move drugs around and manipulate discounts and, of course, your costs. My favorite at the top is, this one of the large PBMs has a brand generic algorithm, or BGA, and it's the whole way throughout their contracts. And basically, it just says, hey, for these purposes, we stabilize product flipping between brand and generics and reduce plan sponsor member provider confusion due to this fluctuation. The sponsor auditor may audit the application of BGA to confirm that the PBM is making brand and generic drug determinations consistent with the algorithm. So what that's literally saying, if you think about it, is we're going to create this whatever algorithm we want. We're going to define drugs however we want. And we're going to then just let an auditor come in and say, yes, I made a bad determination at the front on what's a brand and generic drug. And simply, did I apply that same definition then to what the plan sponsor sees? So they're not saying you can audit whether it was the right determination of how a brand or generic drug should be defined by their algorithm. You can only say, did it get applied appropriately to my plan? So if you really kind of think about the language in some of these contracts, it's just not really good. So at least for brand and generic drugs, there are industry standards you can use to try to come up with a definition. Unfortunately, there's no great definition for specialty or limited distribution drugs where games can occur. And it's important to really tie those down through hopefully a good consultant or somebody else, or, we're always free to have further conversations about this. But on the next slide, there's a kind of what I would call an industry dictionary. And there's a company called Metaspan. Metaspan comes out and they kind of say, hey, for all these different technical things on the background, and it's really hard to see there, sorry. So hopefully when we share these documents later, you can see it a little bit better. But Metaspan has what they call a multi-source and then a brand code. So those are kind of the two there in the left and in the middle. And so a lot of times, though, contracts just only look at the multi-source code, the MONY or MONY codes, as you might have heard. And what it says is like M is a single source product co-licensed, N is a single source product with just one labeler, O is a multi-source product, and T is a trademark product. So a lot of times, even if you kind of get Metaspan in your contract, they will put those codes in and they will say, so if it's an M, which is a single source product, an N, which is a single source product, or T, which is a trademark product, and Metaspan's definition of said drug, it's a brand drug. And then if it's an O, it's a generic. And it's like, well, okay, that's not really great either, because especially from that T standpoint, if you think like birth control pills, or many other kind of generic areas where they do trademark the name of a generic drug, it's still a generic drug. So then you have to use this labeler code, as it's called. And again, you can see it better. We've tried to highlight it through this. But basically, then you can say if it's like a T for the, trademark, and then it's got a, O there, then that should be a multi-source trademark drug. It should be a generic. But then if it's a single source product with a G behind it on that labeler code, well, that's just a generic drug that's got a brand name to it. So you can say, hey, if we use this labeler code and this multi-source code and apply that to it, you should be able to get a good brand name definition that should always apply to then the discount you would pay out of that contract. On the next slide, again, not to get overly technical, because I'm sure this is just like mind-numbing stuff. So hopefully you can read it later at the point in time you need to with your contract language. We did the same thing for a generic drug. There is this concept around dispense as written codes. So if the doctor is sitting there and he says, hey, you need to get this brand drug and not a generic drug, then they kind of fall out. So you can get really, really specific and say, hey, if the DAW code is a 3, 4, 5, 6, or 9 in Metaspan, it should be a brand drug, or a generic drug, then it applies to this logic. All of those are on there. It is probably only about 1 or 1.5% of all drugs ever have one of those codes associated with it that would matter. So in the grand scheme of the world, it's not very worrisome if you don't have that in there. But if you really want to get very, very specific, this slide and the last slide will really help you make sure if you have that in your contract language, it's going to be really hard to game brand and generic definitions. But then when it comes to rebates and rebate exclusions, now it really starts to matter, because the other thing that sometimes these PBMs do is sometimes it's a brand or a specialty drug when they're looking at a discount, but then sometimes they want to change it to a generic drug when it comes to rebate purposes, right? Because they pay rebates off of, again, how the drug is defined. So this is, again, contract language we pulled out of a traditional PBM contract. And what's really crazy to me about this one, and I'll read it, it's a little hard to see, but it says the PBM receives administrative fees from participating manufacturers for these services. These admin fees are calculated based off of, these numbers, and it's this percentage of the acquisition cost or the wholesale acquisition cost. In its capacity as a PBM, the PBM may also receive other compensation from manufacturers for the performance of various programs and services, for example, and then they list 12 things: formulary compliance initiative, clinical management, blah, 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 blah. This compensation is not part of formulary rebates or associated admin fees, and the PBM may realize positive margin between the amount paid to clients and the amount received from the pharmaceutical manufacturers. PBM retains the financial benefit and use of these funds. So they literally call out in the contract, here's things that we get to keep, here's things you get to keep, and yes, we're going to keep positive margin out of that. Again, they should be. That absolutely should not be the case. But this is directly in there in the portion of the contract that calls manufacturer programs, formulary rebates, and how we want to look at these fees. But again, when you've got a 75 or 100-page contract and it's just like buried on page 54 of this contract, it's really hard for people to see that and then even comprehend what that means in relation to their own spend then. And so the way that this really kind of starts playing out in reality on the next slide is we think about how they do this. So, they come and they say, hey, here's some rebate amounts that, we're going to look at for you. And so for this one formulary, per brand claim, you can see year one's $148, year two is $168, year three is $190. If you go to that ESI mail, then, so it's 444, 504, 570. Or if you just do the basic formulary at the bottom, participating pharmacies get $100, and then the PBM is 800, 900, or 1,000. So, one thing about this that's really important to understand is this is so bad on so many levels, because manufacturers pay PBMs rebates usually as a function of a 30-day supply. So for each month you get a prescription filled, they would give the PBM X amount of money. Of course, PBM then should pay you. So first off, you should see a 30-day rebate, a 90-day retail rebate, a mail rebate, which is always considered a 90-day, and then, of course, a specialty rebate. Well, here there's no 30 or 90-day participating pharmacy, retail pharmacy rebate. They're just putting everything kind of at a low 30-day, and then any 90-day supply, they're only going to give you in year one, you can see at the top, $148. So that's $148 4 times as opposed to $148 12 times. So again, it's just a nice way for them to play a game on exactly how many rebates are playing here, because they just didn't call it out. The other thing you should see, if there is we'll just use the one at the bottom with the $100. If it's $100 for a 30-day supply, then the reality is for a 90-day supply, it should be $300. But it's never always that equation, right? It's like $100 for this one, and then I'll give you $250 for the 90-day supply. And then it's just a way for them to keep more money and kind of convolute things. So when you look at these, again, always think 30-day supply should be the thought process. And then do you have a 30-day, a 90-day, and mail is a 90-day? And then how do those proportionally equate to each other? Because it's always should be, the 30-day is one, the 90 and the mail should be kind of 3 times that number because you're really getting 3 months of rebates. So the way this kind of then starts to play out on the next slide is, oh, sorry, Katie, I got off. The limited distribution drugs. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, this one, thank you. So especially in LDD drugs, as we've talked about, there's no real good definition for these, right? So what they do is they also say, hey, if it's a red drug, it's a limited distribution drug. And then later in your contract, when you go under your rebates and you read that they say, hey, we don't rebate limited distribution drugs. Well, that's kind of a big problem because like in this formulary where we have circled, it's really hard to see, but there's this drug Taltz. I'm sure many of you have heard of Humira and Enbrel. Humira is made by manufacturer AbbVie. Enbrel is made by a different manufacturer, Amgen. And then Taltz, who is a competitive product to those two, is actually made by Eli Lilly. Well, nobody's ever really heard of Taltz or Eli Lilly from their Taltz, kind of standpoint of getting Crohn's drugs out there and these anti-inflammatory drugs out there. We really only know of Lilly for their diabetes and their GLP-1 drugs, right? So Lilly's been trying for years to get market access, as they call it, for Taltz because they want to sell a lot of these boxes, but they're having a hard time doing it. So they've got about a $5,000 or $6,000 monthly rebate out there for Taltz. But the PBMs like it when it's an LDD and they push Taltz a little bit because every time a Taltz prescription gets submitted, they bill that Taltz prescription, they send it to the patient, but they say, hey, guess what, client? It's a limited distribution drug. So you don't get a rebate, but then they run over to Eli Lilly and they say, hey, give me my $5,000, and they can legally keep all that money because they say we can't pay any rebate on a limited distribution drug. And I've just defined Taltz here as a limited distribution drug for you. So, it's important to really understand, these drug definitions, and it really should be, hey, in my contract, if you get money from the manufacturer, I should get the money, full stop, and I should be able to see where that money comes from. So, these limited distribution things matter. And then to take it even a step further from a biosimilar standpoint, which of course will be a big topic moving forward, it's interesting. You can see in this example, out of the same contract as we were talking about before, how do I define the drug? Well, it could change depending on how I, the PBM, want to look at the drug. So on the top for rebates, if we exclude, we say, here's what we're excluding from rebates. Member submitted claims, 180-day claims, all these things, but we also exclude biosimilar products. You can see in that first column at the top. So biosimilars, you don't get a rebate. So if the drug's defined as biosimilar, no rebate. And then if you go down to the next box under discounts, this is kind of my favorite. They're like a specialty drug because, then the reality is they should get a better discount off of a biosimilar than they do off of a branded specialty drug, but all of them still pay rebates. Let's be honest. There's no reason not to get any rebates out of biosimilar because they're still expensive products that typically pay rebates. But this one, it's a specialty product means, this, which is just a lot of fluff through the language. But then the very last line, in addition, a biosimilar or generic product will be considered a specialty product if the innovator drug is a specialty product. So what they're saying is, like right now, I've got a biosimilar for Humira called Amjevita. So if Amjevita, which is the biosimilar to Humira, which is a brand drug, if that's the case, then we're just going to consider Amjevita a specialty drug for purposes of discounts and give you the low specialty thing. Like it's literally, you just explained what a specialty drug is and then just basically said, we're going to price it the same as the brand. So again, it gets so complex and technical. It's really hard to, figure all these things out. But like on the next slide, as we think about this, then how it could have a massive impact on you. Like Humira's got as they call it, a list price of about $5,600. And then the company that makes Amjevita came out with, this is the biosimilar for Humira. They came out with it at 2 list prices. So this makes it even harder. So Amjevita, you could be buying the $5,300 Amjevita, or you could be buying the $2,500 Amjevita. Like nobody really knows. Well, the reason that the manufacturer came out with 2 different price points for the same drug is then they went to the PBMs and they said, hey, you guys like expensive stuff, right? So here's the $5,300 Amgevita. We're going to give you a $2,100 rebate. So, here's then how that equates to health plan payment. And then you can see what the patient pays. It's very similar to the brand Humira, where if you go to the lower price Amgevita, health plan picks up a certain amount. There's a lot less member responsibility, at the end of the day. So, but most plans, of course, pick the high cost Amgevita because they want to take the 2,150 in rebates, or I call it total manufacturer revenue. And then what they provide to you in rebates is a different sum, but your member's still paying a higher cost out of pocket at the pharmacy counter. So it's still bad for them. So, we really want to be thoughtful in the future how we think about this kind of discount and rebates always going forward, and then how it plays out in reality. Now on the next slide. Yeah, thank you, Katie. This is the one I was thinking of. So this is just straight out of another contract, and this is actually a state contract. It's a $1.5 billion contract. And so the state, can pick these different things, but I like it. So like for this, particular product, they say, hey, client, where do you want to go? Do you want to go with the 19% discount at the top for year 4 of the specialty discount? And then you can see, kind of right below it, you can get the $1,360 rebate. Or do you want to get the 16% discount on the cost of the drug up front, but then you also get the $1,650 rebate instead? Well, the funny thing is, so let's play this out for, what is the average cost of a specialty drug in $7,500. So you can see on the right, $7,500, you get your 19% discount. That's $6,075. You get your $1,360 specialty rebate. You're going to have a total cost of $4,715. Or they say, hey, little bit less discount, little bit more rebate. If that feels good for you, oh, you want that one? Okay, well, let's play that out for the same $7,500 drug, 16% discount is $6,300. They're going to give you, the $1,575 specialty rebate. So then your total net cost is within $10 of what it would be either way. So, again, that's how they convolute these things, but they know they want their price point right around $4,720 because here's where they get to keep then profit out of all of these different buckets. But it's really hard then to back all these numbers into some sort of reality because they just obscure the definitions and everything. And then on the next slide, just to take it a little bit further, we kind of played the same thing out, but this is, they also, what they like to do is just instead of saying, hey, there's a total specialty discount as a bucket, now they're starting to say, well, we're going to give you a specialty discount based off of each unique drug. And so kind of play the same thing out. Then it's just, they change the rebates, that the math is still there, but we just put this there really to say, here's how they can play this out. They increase the cost of the drug. They give you a 40% rebate. Even when they're keeping manufacturer revenue, there's still a tremendous amount of profit that they can bring into the equation. So, long story short, this is always just kind of a math equation, and it's important to figure out how that math equation works. But then on the next slide, again, even as we think more contract language, pass-through pricing is one of my new favorite things. Because now what the PBMs are saying is, hey, whatever I pay the pharmacy, I'll pass through that exact cost to you with, everything else. I'll pass through 100% of rebates and discounts and fees. And like, again, so people get this in their contract and they think, I got a really good PBM contract. It's 100% pass through. They can't play any games. Well, one is I think, hit over and over so far. If anybody tells you you're getting 100% of rebates, I promise you that's bad, because you are getting 100% of what is legally defined from the manufacturer revenue to the GPO to the PBM as rebates. You are getting 100% of that number. But what you're not getting is a significant percentage of the manufacturer revenue that is simply defined as something different. But this concept of pass-through, again, is also turning into a big problem. And if you think back to that profit slide, so the buckets where the PBMs make their most profit, and that biggest bucket now, the 39% and kind of the orange, was off of their specialty pharmacy. The way that they do that is they just, again, decide what they pay themselves. So on the next slide, we were actually doing some work with a health system. And the health system at the bottom, there's this drug tadalafil. So when the employee of the health system went to the health system's own pharmacy and said, hey, health system pharmacist, I'm here to get my tadalafil. Pharmacist, takes that prescription, takes their insurance and says, oh, you're, here at the health system. I'm going to bill that to the PBM. PBM looks at it and says, yep, okay, that should be $190 for that tadalafil prescription. So the health system pharmacy is feeling pretty good about this because their total cost on this drug is about $20. So they were like, hey, I made $170. This is good. It helps me really continue to get profit and have a good balance sheet then as a health system pharmacy. Well, as we were working with the system, we said, well, do all of your tadalafil prescriptions go to your own pharmacy? And they're like, oh, no, we know like the PBM, tries to pull some out. Like we've told them to stop, but they still do it. So I'm like, well, what do you pay for that same tadalafil prescription? And of course, we're talking with the health system pharmacist at that point. They're like, I don't know, but I know the person who runs benefits and they get the invoice from the PBM for all these drugs. We're like, okay, well, let's go ask them. So when we asked them, they said, well, every time we see a tadalafil prescription filled from the PBM's pharmacy, you can see it's $3,856.34. So we put this together and you can see it's, the top is the PBM's own pharmacy. The bottom is the health system's own pharmacy. We put this drug NDC number in there really just to say this is literally the exact same drug from the exact same manufacturer, probably from the same batch. So the PBM is buying the exact same product that the health system is dispensing. They're all dispensing the same quantity as 60 pills. You can see that. But again, when the PBM decides what it pays the health system pharmacy, it's $190. And again, PBM's this good person because they're going to pass it through. So then they put $190 on the invoice to the benefits people who are paying for that cost out of the health system's right benefit fund. But then the PBM gets that same tadalafil prescription billed from its own PBM pharmacy. And it's like, oh, in this case, I'm going to pay $3,856.34. And then the PBM sits in the middle and says, hey, but client, I'm being a good client and I'm abiding the terms of my contract. I'm charging you now on the benefit side that same $3,856.34. I didn't mark it up, so you got 100% pass through. But you can see the significant profit that they built into the specialty pharmacy side of the house because the PBM sat in the middle, in our opinion, made a poor decision on what it paid the specialty pharmacy and then just passed all those costs to you. So kind of that show game of where and how they hide money based off of contractual terms is usually very worrisome. So then the last slide we have, and then we'll jump into any other questions I know here. And I'll look, I think I did see one pop up. Oh, maybe. Well, when I click chat, I can't see. Oh, there we go. There you go, Darren. In your Taltz example, is it better for the PBM to have Taltz on formulary and dispense and versus the non-LDD drug? How often are LDD drugs excluded from rebates? I'm pretty sure if every single one of you pulls your PBM contracts and looks at your rebate exclusions, LDD drugs are listed. So working backwards on your question, Darren, my guess is maybe not 100% of the time because there might be the odd exception out there, but almost always LDD drugs are completely excluded from rebates. So then to your first part of the question, is it better to have the PBM put Taltz on formulary and dispense versus the non-LDD drugs? So it kind of depends, I would say. Taltz isn't a bad drug. I think it's how the rebate language is written. It really shouldn't be LDD, non-LD. The rebate language should simply say, again, whatever drugs you PBM have deemed are clinically appropriate, right? Help me understand why Taltz is better than Humira. And then fine, once you've done that, that's great. Then if you get any manufacturer money out of Eli Lilly, I want to get the money and I want to have an audit up to that chain to see what you got out of Eli Lilly. That's kind of the best way to do it because even whether Taltz is on formulary or not, they're going to call it an LDD drug. And either way, it's not going to pay a rebate. So, it's really hard to kind of track those things down. But, the big question is, again, how you are defining money getting to you. And it really, I go back to, it should just say, if you get money, PBM, through any affiliated entity that is owned by your parent organization, I want to see those monies and I want to get access to it. And I want to make sure I'm getting my fair share of it. So again, if you guys have any other questions, let us know. And this last one, this is, again, one of my kind of favorite things. People always say like, "Hey, I got market check language in my contract." And I ask a lot of them, did you read your market check language? Because when you think about the terms of a 3-year contract, usually the first of the year, so you sign a contract, call it 1/1 of 23. They would say, hey, 1/1/24, 1/1/25, you have the ability to, kind of change your prices or, do something different. And then contract, of course, expires 1/1/26 unless you renew. Well, this market check language almost always is this. It says following the first year and a half of this agreement. So you have to wait 18 months before you can even talk about a market check. The sponsor's designee may provide a written comparison prepared by an independent PBM consultant for PBM services offered by a third-party PBM provider that includes or takes into account all of this stuff. And basically what it says is if after 18 months, you can prove that there's another company that looks exactly like you, that has the exact same formulary, the exact same clinical trend programs, retail, mail, specialty mix. So, 80% of your, fills go to retail, 15% go to mail and 5% specialty, and your demographics are the same. So you have the same demographics, same age, gender, everything of everybody there. Then we'll go ahead and, consider that. We'll have to go back and forth a bunch of times. And, again, we'll have 15 days to answer that question. And if the analysis that we then do concludes that it's 3% or more savings in net plan costs, well, then we'll do this thing. And then the revised pricing terms will become effective on the first day of the next contract year following issuance of the report, or 60 days following a fully executed amendment. So what we've seen happen, honestly, like numerous times, is after 18 months, you, the employer, would say, hey, PBM, I'm going to do a market check. And they're like, okay, well, go hire a consultant and do this stuff. So you go hire a consultant and try to prove all of these very specific things from a separate company match exactly your company. Well, then the PBM's negotiating that back and forth. And they've got 15 days to answer this. And then they send your answer. And then you've got 15 days to answer them back. And then they send it. So these 15 days are just getting wasted here and there. And then, they continue to push. And a lot of times, they push it till right after the first of the year to get this done. So then they say, well, hey, okay, sure, we agree, it's January, but now you're 2 years into your contract and your contract's up at the end of the third year. So it starts, on the first of your next contract year, which is again when it's expired, and you're going to get a new contract either way, or after you get a fully executed amendment from the PBM. I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried to sign an amendment with a PBM, but that's, again, not a weekly process, not a monthly process. They push that out for months and months and months. So, again, the way that they've defined this market check, it's almost impossible to even figure out how to get one. If you actually do get one, then they push it out through all of this kind of obscure and frankly unrealistic. Well, it can only happen after 18 months, and then it's only then going to come available for the first of the following contract year, which is probably when your contract's expired, or we'll have to sign an amendment and we're just going to take forever to get the amendment to sign. So all of these words they put in there and they try to make it sound really good. But if you really kind of think or have to live through this once, it is just an awful, awful process. And it's just another tactic PBMs use to, in our opinion, not always do the right thing for you and your employees' independence. So with that, and I know, that great folks at PBGH are going to send this out. We talked a lot, I know, about optimizing contract language, and, you'll have some of this to reference back to. Definitely think about the PBM games and how they're making money, and then how that leans into some of the recommendations they give for you on how to optimize your plan, spend, and trend. And then, even from that spreadsheet standpoint of discount versus rebate versus other, how does that work? How does that feel? We highly recommend, really trying to figure out to say, hey, so let's face it, for you guys in the last, call it 3 to 5 years, pretty much it feels like every year your PBM's probably coming to you to say, here's a higher 30-day discount off retail, 90-day discount, specialty discount. So I'm going to give you better discounts. And then your rebates are going to go up as a net paid claim. So if all of the time it feels like your discounts are getting better, your rebates are getting better, well, at the end of the year, when you net all that out and you look at the money that came and went from your bank account, pretty much every year you spent more money this year than you spent the year before. So somehow, even with better discounts and rebates, your total costs went up. we really believe we need to start having a total cost conversation, because that's how you buy any other vendor agreement, right? We don't buy milk off a 27% discount and you go to the checkout and all of a sudden it's $53. No. You buy milk at like $2. That's exactly what you see. You pick it up. And pharmacy should and can be the same way. It's just they put all this complexity in there really to continue to hide the ball and figure out how they can continue to make profit for their shareholders. Again, in our opinion, really at the detriment of self-funded employers. So, it really kind of think about all of these things. Then next time you do talk to a consultant or get into a contract, posture with your PBM. We've got about 4 minutes left. If anybody else has any questions, let us know, or we can always follow up after the fact as well. I know that was probably a long, quick, wild ride all in one.
These are my favorite moments, Greg, at the end, when you've done a big impactful presentation and somebody has to break the silence in order to ask a question. I don't envy virtual professors and people that have to teach, because getting the engagement is so much harder virtually than in person. But I'm sure that we'll get a lot of follow-up questions. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through all of this with us today. It's I have my notepad filled up, and I'm sure others do as well.
Yeah, and Mike, exactly to your point, any follow-ups that we can answer for the group, we're always glad to do that. We know it's a lot, it's really complicated, and it takes a little bit to sink in. So we're always here to help when we can.
Awesome. Well, do we want to go ahead and tease the next episode of this 3-part series here? Do we have that on a slide of when the next one's scheduled, and make sure that everybody knows and gets that on their calendars?
I don't know if there's a slide. It's going to be on December 15th, also at 1:30, and you can use the same link that you used today for this webinar. And then also for attendees, we will send out the PDF presentation from today and a follow-up email. So make sure to check that out too.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thanks again, Greg. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the Affirmed team for running point and helping us on all this. And Annie, of course, thank you for getting us all set up on a technical side of things. If we don't have any questions, we can all go about our days and have a great weekend, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Katie. Appreciate the help.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Bye.